She's gonna implode. Karen made a call. My phone buzzed. I let it ring. Then came a text. Please open the gate. I'd like to speak peacefully. I walked calmly toward the path, but didn't open the gate. I stopped about 15 feet away, perfectly visible under the porch light, and waited. She saw me, visibly startled at first, then plastered on a rehearsed smile. Just a quick word, she called out, her tone syrupy, practiced. It's important. I folded my arms. Everything's important to you, Karen. Especially when you're not invited. She held her ground. I heard you're hosting a gathering tonight. That's fine. But I do hope you're not using it to undermine community unity. I laughed once through my nose and replied, Karen, I'm just having dinner with friends. You're the one who turned a neighborhood into a battlefield. She stepped closer to the gate, pressing her hand lightly on the chain. You know, this isn't sustainable, she said. You've made enemies. They might smile in your yard, but they'll turn on you. You're dividing us. I raised an eyebrow. No, Karen. You divided us the day you decided my property was your event venue. I'm just drawing the lines you've been erasing. She opened her mouth to respond, then paused, as if waiting for the perfect final line to come. But it didn't. Instead, she glanced toward the crowd behind me, the glow of lights, the sound of real conversation and music, and realized she didn't belong there. She turned, got back in her car, and drove off, tires crunching against gravel like a slow retreat from a war she'd already lost. As the evening wound down, I handed out leftovers, shared quiet nods with guests who lingered a little longer, and finally, when the last folding chair was packed away, I sat alone on the porch with Hank at my feet, watching the reflection of stars ripple in the lake. It had taken months, countless headaches, and enough paperwork to level a forest, but for the first time in a long while, the land felt still again. Not just because Karen had been pushed back, but because I had reclaimed something more vital than space, my voice, my peace, and my right to not be stepped on by someone who mistook arrogance for leadership. But I knew one thing for sure, Karen wasn't done. Not yet. She would find another angle, another technicality to weaponize. That was her way. But now, every time she turned a corner, she'd find the sheriff, the county clerk, the law, and the neighbors she'd underestimated standing in her way. And behind them, quiet and ready, would be me. No clipboard, no speech, just a locked gate and a longer memory. And that's what she could never outvote. The final blow didn't come with sirens or lawsuits or even a gate slamming shut. It came quietly, with ink and signatures and a twist so poetic it made me sit down and laugh until I cried. I had long since accepted that Karen was incapable of admitting defeat, but what I hadn't expected was how far she'd go to manufacture a new battlefield once all the old ones had collapsed beneath her heels. 4 weeks after the cookout, things remained oddly calm. No new complaints, no HOA letters, not a single uninvited guest trying to squeeze through the brush. I would have loved to believe she'd finally grown tired of the fight, but Karen didn't retreat. She plotted. And true to form, she came back one last time swinging harder than ever, convinced she had found the perfect legal trap to reclaim her imaginary authority over my land. It arrived in the form of a thick certified envelope marked urgent, a notice of property dispute. I opened it on the porch, beer in hand, while Hank watched with the kind of squint that always meant trouble was inside. The document claimed that the HOA had discovered an old survey error, a supposedly misdrawn boundary line that, if corrected, would place a small portion of my access road under HOA oversight. According to the letter, this technicality gave them authority to influence ingress policy for adjacent parcels. Translation: they wanted control of my gate. It was a bold, desperate, and hilariously flawed attempt to resurrect their power over me. But what Karen didn't know, what she could never have known, was that I had already bought the entire road 6 months ago. Back before the wedding fiasco even began, I had looked into purchasing the strip of land that led to my cabin from the main county road. It wasn't much, just a half-mile stretch of rocky gravel that the original developer had never properly deeded to anyone. It had sat in legal limbo for years, maintained by me out of necessity, ignored by the county because of its low traffic volume. I filed an application to acquire it through abandonment and repurchase, paid the necessary fees, and had the entire process quietly processed through Dugan. The paperwork took time. Surveys, filings, approvals. But once finalized, the road was legally mine. Gate to road, road to turnoff, every inch. I didn't publicize it, didn't change a thing. I just waited. And now, Karen had wandered right into it, thinking she'd discovered some great hidden loophole when in fact she'd just challenged me over property that didn't even belong to the HOA anymore. I could have just called Dugan and let him respond with a one-line rebuttal. I could have sent back a smug letter and been done with it. But no, this one called for a more fitting end. Something permanent. I sat down, drafted a short, polite letter on fresh stationery, attached a copy of the title transfer and land ownership map, and walked it over to the HOA's drop box myself. I placed it inside, smiled at the rusted lock, and then turned to face what I knew would be my final act in this strange little war. 3 days later, the county officially notified the HOA that they no longer had jurisdiction over the road. The notice was public. It went on record. And more importantly, it triggered a mandatory audit of the HOA's boundary map, which had now been proven incorrect. That audit unearthed several additional issues: unauthorized structures on neighboring land, a lack of transparency in dues usage, and a pattern of events hosted without permits. One member resigned. Another quietly stepped away. Karen, of course, refused to accept any wrongdoing. She held one last emergency board meeting, the same night the audit results were read aloud at the town hall, and tried to spin everything as sabotage, claiming she was the target of a conspiracy orchestrated by rogue residents with vendettas. I didn't go to the meeting, but Roger did. He recorded it. Karen's voice trembled with forced authority as she scolded her own board members, called the county clerk a puppet, and suggested that I had paid off surveyors to falsify land documents. When one board member stood and told her it was over, that the HOA had overreached and fractured the community, she accused him of cowardice and stormed out. The next morning, a petition was circulated to dissolve the HOA entirely. It passed in under 48 hours with 76% support. Karen had gone too far, too often, and people were finally done with her theater of rules. But that still wasn't the end. There was one more page to flip, because 2 weeks later, just as summer began to fade and the first orange leaves started dancing down from the trees, I received a curious invitation in the mail. It was cream-colored, embossed, and absurdly formal. I nearly tossed it, assuming it was junk, but the name stopped me cold. It read, "You are cordially invited to the wedding of James Witherspoon and Eliza Stanton." I blinked, read it again, and smiled. James Witherspoon was Karen's ex-husband, the one she still spoke about with unearned superiority, claiming he'd lost the best thing that ever happened to him. Eliza, from what I remembered, was the quiet, kind-hearted woman Karen had once publicly ridiculed as that librarian with no style. The wedding was being held at the town's botanical garden, nice, tasteful, low-key. And at the bottom of the invitation, in looping pen ink, someone had added, "Would love to catch up. You've got the best stories." At first, I wasn't going to go. But then I realized what this meant. Karen would be there. Not as a bride. Not as an organizer. Just as a guest, distant, uninvited to the spotlight, watching someone else get the attention she craved. And I knew I had to show up, not out of pettiness, but to bring this entire tale full circle. The day of the wedding was perfect. Blue sky, soft breeze, no drama. I wore a clean shirt, polished boots, and brought a small gift. When I arrived, Eliza greeted me warmly. James shook my hand with a laugh and said, "I heard about the lake. You're a legend." And then I saw Karen, standing near the back row, wearing sunglasses even though we were under a tent, her arms crossed, her expression flat and unreadable. She looked older somehow, smaller than I remembered. When her eyes met mine, there was no fire, no flare of anger, just the long, quiet look of someone who finally realized the world didn't revolve around her rules anymore. I didn't speak to her. Didn't need to. The silence between us said everything. The wedding was lovely. No speeches, no drama, just a good meal, a happy couple, and a few shared laughs. On my way out, I signed the guest book and paused for a moment, pen in hand. Then I wrote, in calm, steady script, "Thank you for reminding me that peace is always worth defending." That night, I returned to the lake, the real lake, mine, quiet and still under the stars. The gate was locked. The cameras were off. The fire pit glowed low. Hank lay at my feet as I watched the water ripple in the moonlight, the final chapter closed, the final move made. And for the first time in a long while, there was no next move to prepare. Just stillness. And the quiet joy of knowing that I hadn't just defended my land. I had outlasted the storm,